You won't believe what happened when a seemingly ordinary HOA Karen decided to take matters into her own hands and hijack a food delivery. What was supposed to be a quick drop-off turned into a full-blown disaster, all because she thought she had the right to keep someone else's food. Little did she know, what she did was way more serious than she could have imagined. At first, it seemed like an innocent mix-up, a simple misunderstanding, or maybe even an overreaction. But when the delivery driver showed up at the wrong address, this HOA Karen didn't hesitate to grab the food and claim it as her own. What she didn't realize was that the value of that food crossed the line into something much more serious. When the authorities got involved, things took a turn for the worse. As the situation unraveled, she quickly learned that theft over $500 isn't just a minor mistake, it's grand larceny. And that's when things went south for her fast. But here's the kicker, she didn't even see it coming. How did it all go down? And what happened to the Karen once the law caught up with her? Stick around to find out what happened next. To understand how things escalated so quickly, let's take a step back. The woman at the center of this whole mess was an HOA member known for being, well, a little overbearing. She was always quick to call out neighbors for even the smallest infractions, constantly reminding everyone of the rules. But no one expected her to take it to this level. The food delivery driver had simply made a mistake, a wrong address, something that happens all the time. Normally, a quick phone call would clear it up, but not this time. Instead of reaching out to the customer, the HOA Karen decided to step in, thinking she could help by holding onto the delivery. She didn't care to double-check the address. To her, it was just another case of people not paying attention. But the food wasn't cheap. This wasn't just a $10 pizza. The order was valued well over $500. It included high-end meals for an event. And once the delivery driver realized what had happened, he immediately contacted the customer, who was furious. Now the situation was snowballing. It wasn't just about some food. It was about the money, the time, and the trust that was being broken. The HOA Karen, still not fully understanding the seriousness of what she had done, went on with her day, completely unaware that her actions had crossed a dangerous line. Would she realize it before it was too late? Stay tuned to find out how this crazy story ends. As the day wore on, the HOA Karen's world started to feel a little smaller. Word about the food delivery mix-up began to spread among the neighbors. Some saw it as a harmless mistake, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, while others began to sense something more troubling beneath the surface. The more the driver tried to reach her, the more she ignored his calls. After all, she had already decided the food was her property now. But little did she know, the person waiting for that delivery wasn't just any ordinary customer. The customer, a high-profile local business owner, had ordered the catering for a big client meeting that could make or break a deal. They had been waiting all day, anxious for the food to arrive, and when the delivery never showed up, their nerves were stretched thin. At first, they figured it was a mistake, but as hours passed and calls went unanswered, frustration turned to rage. The stakes were higher than just an unfulfilled meal. It was about reputation, and that was something no one took lightly. Meanwhile, the HOA Karen, still clueless about the full gravity of the situation, started telling herself that it wasn't a big deal. It's just food, she reasoned, brushing off the mounting tension. After all, she was doing the right thing, wasn't she? But what she didn't realize was that she was digging herself deeper. When a neighbor, a retired detective, heard the story, he began to piece things together. This wasn't a simple case of an angry customer. It was grand larceny, a crime that carried serious consequences. The detective, sensing something was off, quietly started gathering information. Now the situation was spinning out of control. The HOA Karen was no longer just dealing with an upset customer. She was facing legal action, and she had no idea how close she was to a nightmare she never saw coming. Would the truth come out before it was too late? And what would happen if the law finally caught up with her? The clock was ticking, and the tension was rising. As the evening approached, things were starting to unravel quickly. The frustrated customer had already contacted the delivery service, the police, and anyone else they could think of. Word spread fast, and soon the HOA Karen's actions weren't just an isolated incident, they were the talk of the neighborhood. The retired detective, who had been quietly keeping track of the situation. The HOA Karen was still holding onto the food, convinced she was in the right, but every call she ignored only added fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, the business owner was growing increasingly desperate. They'd even offered a reward for the return of the food, but the Karen didn't budge. In her mind, she was doing the right thing, maybe even a little bit of good by keeping the food out of the wrong hands, even though it wasn't hers to take. Tensions between the neighbors began to build too. Those who had previously defended her were now second-guessing their stance, wondering just how far she would go to protect her territory. But the moment that really shifted everything came when the police arrived at her door. They didn't knock, they barged in. By now, the HOA Karen had started to realize that the situation had escalated beyond her control. Her hands shook as she opened the door to a uniformed officer. "Ma'am, you're under investigation for theft." The weight of those words hit harder than she could have ever imagined. Panic set in as the reality of the situation came crashing down. She tried to explain herself, but it was too late. The law had already made up its mind. Or had it? Was there still time to make things right? Could she somehow avoid the full consequences of her actions, or had her fate already been sealed? The final showdown was about to happen, and it was clear that no one, including the HOA Karen herself, knew how it would all end. Just as the officer stepped forward, ready to make the arrest, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house. The HOA Karen froze, her face drained of color. The officer, equally startled, spun around, eyes narrowing. What could it be? The detective, who had been quietly observing from across the street, felt a shiver run down his spine. Was this a distraction? Or something more? The officer gestured for the Karen to stay put and rushed toward the sound. Seconds later, another officer joined him, both moving cautiously toward the back of the house. Meanwhile, the Karen was left standing in the doorway, heart racing, her mind swirling with the realization that something far worse than she imagined was unfolding. The next few moments felt like an eternity. The second officer returned first, looking stunned. "Ma'am, we have a problem," he said, his voice tense. The Karen's stomach sank as the officer stepped aside, revealing the most unexpected sight: her neighbor, the one she had argued with over HOA rules multiple times, standing there with an empty food delivery bag. It was the same one she'd taken hours earlier. The plot thickened in an instant. It turned out that her neighbor, who had been suspicious of her actions the whole time, had gone into her backyard and grabbed the food while she wasn't looking. The neighbor had a history of causing trouble, and now it seemed they were trying to set her up, making it look like she had stolen the delivery in the first place. The Karen's mouth went dry as the full scope of the situation began to unravel. The officer's eyes flicked between the two of them, the weight of the new twist settling in. Now, not only was there the potential for grand larceny charges, but there was also the possibility that this whole mess could turn into a battle of accusations. Who was telling the truth? What really happened with the food delivery? The stakes had gone from bad to catastrophic, and the clock was ticking on what could become an explosive legal battle. How would the Karen handle this newfound crisis? Would she be able to clear her name, or had she unknowingly walked into a trap? Yes. The officer stepped closer. The air was thick with tension. The neighbor, who had been caught with the delivery bag, was visibly nervous, stuttering over his words. "I didn't take it, he began, but the officer cut him off. "You're going to want to stop talking right now," the officer said, his tone stern. The Karen, still in shock, tried to make sense of it all. Her heart raced as she glanced between the two men. Everything had escalated so quickly. It was clear now that her neighbor was trying to frame her, but how much of this was the neighbor's fault? And how much of it was her own overzealous behavior? In the midst of the confusion, the detective from earlier finally spoke up. "Actually, There's something you all need to see." He had been quietly watching the situation unfold from the sidelines, but now he stepped forward, holding up his phone. On the screen was a series of security camera footage from the Karen's own house. The footage showed her neighbor sneaking around the back, clearly taking the delivery bag. The revelation hit like a ton of bricks. The Karen stared, speechless, as the detective explained how he had quietly installed cameras in the neighborhood after hearing about several odd incidents with this particular neighbor. It turned out the neighbor had been involved in multiple petty thefts and disputes with other residents, but this time he had gone too far. The neighbor, now cornered, couldn't deny it. His face flushed with embarrassment, and he slowly slumped down onto the porch steps, realizing he had just been caught in his own web of lies. The Karen, for her part, was stunned, her whole perception of the situation shifting in an instant. What had started as a petty theft on her part had now turned into a complicated mess involving an even bigger crime. The officer turned to the Karen. "You're free to go," he said, "but you'll need to clear up this misunderstanding with the delivery service." As the officers made their way off the property, the Karen stood there, trying to process everything that had just happened. But just as she thought things were winding down, a final twist came. The detective turned back to her with a smirk. "One more thing," he said, holding up a small bag of cash. "I've been tracking some other activities around here. Seems your neighbor has a history of gambling debts. Looks like this was about more than just food." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Not only had she been dragged into a crime she hadn't even committed, but she had unwittingly been part of something much bigger. What started as an innocent mistake had exploded into a tangled mess of lies, deceit, and crime. As the detective walked away, she couldn't help but wonder just how deep the rabbit hole went, and if she'd ever truly escaped the mess she had stumbled into.